Good afternoon, everybody. I think uh, we are at a loss as to how to tackle this session. It's on biography, the art of biography. I have two eminent biographers on either side of me. I'm not a practicing biographer. I mean, maybe one day I'll write a biography, I don't know. But I do teach literature, and I do teach about the genre called biography. So maybe we'll begin by talking about what is it that constitutes a biography. Sagarika?
Thanks a lot, and thank you so much to the Mathrubhumi Festival of Letters for this session. I think this is a very interesting subject. What constitutes the art of writing a biography, and what is a biography? I think if we were to think about it, when a biographer begins to tackle a subject, is the first question, Ullek, I mean, since you're a biographer as well, is the first question that can I have sympathy for this person? Or is the first question, can I understand this person? I think for me, it's a question of also, it's journalistic as well, because it's almost like an expose of a particular personality in history, warts and all. And I think it's often confusing that people think a biographer is a sympathizer, or a biographer is someone who is a sort of camp follower of the person they are writing about. I've written biographies of Indira Gandhi and Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and I'm not a camp follower of either of them. So I think the issue really is, for me, because I'm a journalist, I see it more as a kind of writing a biography as a kind of laying bare of a person, a kind of investigative, psychoanalytical investigation, investigative journalism of a person, to lay that person bare, and show what he or she represented in history. There have been celebrated biographies of Hitler. It doesn't mean that the people who wrote about Hitler are sympathizers of Hitler. Whereas in India, often this happens. If you write a biography of a certain politician, it's assumed that you are, that you're sympathetic to that politician. Of course, some sympathy does come in when you're writing about a person. But I think the overall objective of a biography, and I think what a biography really is to take an individual, locate that individual in the times in which he or she lived, and investigate the reality of that particular person and how sometimes hidden realities impacted his or her surroundings and made a difference to our lives, because invariably biographies are written about famous people or important people who changed our lives or made a difference to all of us. So what is it about these particular people that had the power to change our world? That question interests me.
It's very interesting that Sagarika brought in that journalistic aspect in biography writing. It's not just journalists who employ journalistic, certain kind of a journalistic trait in the writing of biographies. Even people like Stephen Kotkin, who is a Princeton University professor, who has written a mammoth, very voluminous work on Stalin. He has employed journalism and extensively. If you look back, it's more of investigative journalism than any academic pursuit per se. Of course, when you write about a person, you always place a person in the historical context, especially when we write about historical figures. And I think it's not just the journalists who do that, and even Montefiore, who wrote a biography of Stalin, he had done that. And Isaacson, who has written about Steve Jobs and a lot of other people. All these people employ journalistic methods to the craft in writing biographies. So at least we can be a little proud of the fact that journalism isn't dead, especially when it's alive and kicking when it comes to writing biographies, as it is with a lot of other things. But we see a lot of changes happening at the moment, because why Sagarika, possibly why she brought up the whole thing about the whole hazard that biographers face about being seen as a sympathizer. It happens. It happens so much in India. Also, perhaps because there are a lot of biographers who try to whitewash certain historical figures who have possibly not withstood historical scrutiny in terms of their qualities as a patriot or a freedom fighter. And so there are a lot of attempts, very contrived efforts being made by some people to write very sympathetic hagiographic accounts of people. It's not anything new, but there's a trend. That trend is gaining in strength and momentum. And so maybe that's one reason. But I think, one has to always, it's easy to see the difference, and it's easy to understand why you approach a subject. For instance, Indira Gandhi is a character that will always be written about in India, because even much more than Nehru, because of how she reshaped Indian politics, and how she continues to be more influential even in indirect ways to Indian democracy, much more than Nehru is, who is being trashed, and who is being, somebody is trying to give an indecent burial to Nehru. So in that context, I think it's a tough proposition to be a biographer. It's not easy to be a biographer. It's very easy that you are misunderstood, and it's very easy as you are misunderstood, as all these historical characters are also complex and misunderstood. But as a person who has written a biography of people from across the spectrum, I remember very clearly. I was reading reading parliamentary debates in which Mrs. Gandhi gives it to Vajpayee, who otherwise is seen as a great orator and a speaker who can take on anyone with his all sorts of figures of speech and things like that. But on one occasion, I think it happened sometime in the 1970s, when Indira Gandhi took on Vajpayee for his certain kind of remarks that, of course, even in today's time are seen as communal. So I think, as a person who has handle these diverse and people from different backgrounds, what are your learnings? Maybe I think you will talk about it, so that future biographers who are working on this might find it helpful.
If I can maybe sum up what we were trying to say. A biography is definitely not a hagiography, which is something that I think all three of us agree upon. Maybe the genre is being taken up by people who create hagiographies of the lives that they are writing, but it definitely is not a hagiography. It ought not to be. The other thing that especially Ullekh was trying to say was that it is an investigative genre. There is a certain kind of an investigative, trend. I mean, an eye for investigation, which forms, I think, the crux of the genre, the writing itself. But in response to what Sagarika said about sympathy, when we speak about the laying bare of a life, it's somebody else's life that we are laying bare. So even as we profess that we do not have sympathy, we might not have sympathy with the subject. At the same time, I think a biographical writing is still deeply imbued by a sense of empathy, which I think is necessary.
That's a very moot point, because you see, while while you may not have sympathy, you're at the same time creating a work that has to have integrity. It can't be something that doesn't talk to the reader because it is full of disdain or contempt of your own subjective views. Now, when I was asked to write on Vajpayee, I mean, the publisher actually told me that you should write it because you're a liberal and you'll be able to appreciate or understand this particular person who comes from a very different viewpoint than your own. And I had to struggle with that, frankly, because there were times when I didn't like Vajpayee, and there were times when I found that he was actually quite intellectually dishonest occasionally. He was morally very flawed. He was, in fact, in many ways guilty of trickery, a kind of kind of ideological trickery, sort of moral trickery. But then, all of this makes up the, what Immanuel Kant called the crooked timber of mankind. And we are dealing with flawed, crooked timber. Whether it's Indira Gandhi or whether it's Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And out of the crooked timber of mankind, nothing straight comes. So I think my learning from writing these two biographies is that actually everybody is crooked timber. Some have it sort of, exposed more, or some hide it better, or, for example, you were talking about the parliamentary debates, Ullekh. There was this big issue or controversy. Did Vajpayee call Indira Gandhi Durga after the Bangladesh war? And of course, it's not in the parliamentary records. I searched through it. I was trying to find Durga. It's not there. And all the BJP supporters of Vajpayee said nothing doing. He certainly didn't call her Durga. There was no way he would call her Durga. Whereas, in fact, I found two of his confidants, N.M. Ghatate and H.K. Dua, who actually told me on record that he had called her Durga and he had admitted to them that he called her Durga. Now, who should I believe? Who does the biographer believe? Does the biographer believe the written record, which obviously it's not there in the written record? I mean, Sitaram Yechuri claims that it actually is there, it was expunged, but I could not find it in the record that I looked at, in the parliamentary speeches that I looked at. So because of that, I was forced to introduce a qualification because I couldn't find it, you see. Now, is that the truth that he didn't call her Durga? Is the truth that he called her Durga? His best friends vouch for the fact that he did. His party supporters say he didn't. It's not in the written record. So that's all I can say. As a biographer, that's all I can say as a person investigating a material, because all I have is the material. I know that I have my beliefs. I can sort of imagine him calling her that. How would such a story emerge if he didn't call her that? But since I have no record for it, and since I can't find the record for it, I can't put it in the book. I can't put it as truth in the book. So these qualifications a biographer has to come up. And the point about what Ullekh was saying about investigation, about biographies as investigative journalism. Absolutely, it's investigative journalism. It's also investigating the personality. It's also investigating kind of the psychoanalysis of a person, because I think that's quite interesting to me. Just to come to a slightly different point, how many here have read Harry's book, Spare, Prince Harry, or seen the Netflix documentary Harry and Meghan, right? I wish that Indian public figures would adopt a healthy dose of Harry and Meghan style candidness. Because, they're at least being truthful about what they went through. They're being truthful about what happened in the royal family. I mean, in India, we have public personalities hiding behind power and secrecy and, authority and walls, so that we often don't know what the private life is of the person. Now, do public figures have a right to a personal life? Do public figures have a right to say, thus far and no further, you can't come into my life anymore? Now, in the Western press, actually public figures don't have a right to a private life because everything is out in the open. You know, Mahatma Gandhi, for example, the reason why we know about his experiments with sexuality, with celibacy, with cleaning of the toilets, with his own experiments with diet, is because Gandhi is writing about them all the time himself. He's himself pouring out his ideas about celibacy and about, you know, sexual experimentation and all of that. So Gandhi is writing about all of this himself. Now, why don't Indian public figures be more open about their lives? Why should there be this veil of secrecy? I'm not saying we should go into the bedroom, but I'm just saying, why should there be this veil of power and secrecy and authority that if the media goes thus far and no further, we will slap you with criminal defamation, we will slap you with, you know, this law and that law. You know, if a public figure is committing abuse or is engaging in emotional abuse or physical abuse or engaging in some forms of personal behavior which are immoral, I think the taxpayer has a right to know. Citizens who are voting for him or her have a right to know. So, you know, in this sense, again, I mean, when a biographer is working, you come across a lot of personal detail. Now, are you going to put in all the personal details, even if it makes you a little squeamish, even if it makes you, you know, sort of a little embarrassed? I didn't, because I felt that there is still a culture of authority and reverence in India that such tell-all accounts will not be accepted. But mind you, I have a problem with that culture of authority and reverence. I abided by it. I did not cross certain limits. But I do feel that this culture of sort of, you know, that we have to preserve a certain feudal distance with our leaders and we can't talk about their private lives. I think this is very old-fashioned. It's very, it is very feudal. It is very, you know, it's not modern. I think public figures should be much more open about their private lives and should have the courage to be like Gandhi, actually, who was much more open. Now, in both the books that I've written, both the biographies that I've written, both these people had extremely colorful personal lives. And they had very open personal lives. And Vajpayee was never ashamed of his relationship with the woman he lived with. He was not married to her. He lived with her all his life. She was married to somebody else. He lived with her husband, her children, all together in the same house. And he wasn't ashamed of it. Now, if he wasn't ashamed of it and he was doing it openly, why can't the biographer write more about it? So, you know, I just think that we're too squeamish in India. We're too careful. We shouldn't have to be so careful.
I think, Sagarika, if I may interrupt you, I think that also comes because of the kind of strict divide we have between what is public and what is private. And there's a lot of hypocrisy
but
when it comes.
Hypocritical, isn't it? It's the double lie.
Deeply
it's a
hypocritical.
double lie. Because,
deeply
you
hypocritical.
know, the feminists would say the personal is the political. So in that sense, you know, I think this shattering of the hypocrisy also is something that I think a biographer should do. So I think if you're planning to write a biography, I think don't be squeamish. Of course, don't put yourself in a position where you feel you're being embarrassed by what you write, but have a healthy dose of irreverence towards your subject.
Yeah, I agree completely about this idea of irreverence, especially because you're dealing with characters who, like Sagarika said, are not like Gandhi, whose life was so transparent. He spoke about everything, and one thing that that you cannot deny Gandhi is the weightage that he gave for transparency, talk about anything and everything, which is also one reason why he's a whipping boy for those people who are antagonistic towards him, those who are his political rivals, or those who want to see him as a wrongdoer to this country. So maybe that's one reason a lot of people, like Machiavelli said, same is the case with Kautilya. They all said, don't reveal your secrets. So politicians essentially are not people who, unlike Gandhi, don't reveal their secrets. They don't talk about even those things they can share with others. So I think it calls for, therefore, unlike those people who write biographies on Gandhi by interpreting whatever he had said and often misinterpreting him, and it's very well known that Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa fought for the rights of the Indian community and not for the blacks. And both Gandhi skeptics as well as admirers of Gandhi, if I attempt to write biographies or make comments, make a huge mistake of not placing Gandhi in that historical context, and also acknowledging that he is capable of making mistakes. Of course, one might argue that a Mahatma should not make mistakes, but he was human after all. But he was a very transparent human being. So again, coming back to biography, you don't have characters like Gandhi. You don't get those kind of characters like Gandhi often. And the only person who I've seen has come anywhere close to Gandhi in terms of transparency is Mike Tyson, whose biography I read. And Mike Tyson says that, at one point he says he has no qualms about revealing anything that he had done. Which he continues to do, and he has come out with a new volume, the updated version of his biography also, in which it's so funny that he admits he was asked a question by his co-writer, and it's an autobiography in which he got a writer to write along with, and he was asked a question, and that why do you have a bodyguard? So he says, I didn't hire bodyguards to save myself from the public, but to save the public from me. So this kind of transparency you might find only in such people. I know, a lot of people in it. So therefore, it is incumbent upon potential biographers to see the agenda of these politicians and to see the message behind these agendas, and
because they shouldn't be allowed to get away with telling us what they want to write.
Yeah, which is often the case.
I mean, that they want a particular image of themselves to be conveyed,
yeah,
and that's what the information that you get. Now, why should a biographer fall for that?
Yeah, which is again the case with one condition that I have found most often. It has become a trend for families to share papers of those people whose biographies they want to be written. Is the condition that it is going to be an official biography or an authorized biography in which you are going to let us vet whatever you have written, and not let anything that we don't seem appropriate to be part of the biography. So it's unlike what people think biography is. It's not an easy task. Writing a biography is a rigorous process in which you have to, especially in India, Sagarika is right about openness that you find in a lot of other societies. Even when you look at even biographies by Putin, biographies of Putin, they are written by Masha Gazin and a lot of people in those societies that we say there is great suppression of freedom of speech, and the media is under threat all the time. Journalists are killed and all. They get a lot of people, especially in bureaucracy, and also among the rival political parties, to get to speak, and even off the record they manage to get a lot of things, which is not the case with a democracy like India. So definitely a biographer in India is faced with a lot of odds if the intention of the biographer is to write the truth. So again, is it part of a culture? And Mahatma Gandhi is also part of a culture, and he taught us that transparency is the most important thing, and we are using it as a tool to target him, so many years after his death, and so many years after his birth, and
when it was a source of his strength, actually, that his life was an open book. And in fact, if you go into the personal, you will find there are things that explain the person very well. For example, Ian Kershaw's biography of Hitler, which has just come out in a paperback, which I've read, traces Hitler's complex and his huge inferiority complex to the fact that he was a failed painter. Hitler wanted to be a painter, actually, and he failed. He was a failure at painting. And, and from that, Kershaw draws, lessons of this failed army man, this failed painter, or a sort of litany of failures that actually led Hitler into this blind hatred of those who were succeeding, and the Jews were just a byword for excellence. That is,
which is true of even Bal Thackeray, who
was also
a
failed
journalist and
then Louis Fisher, in his biography of Gandhi, writes very insightfully on Gandhi's relationship with his son. And Gandhi's relationship with Harilal, I mean, everybody who reads this book will identify with it. A father and son, the sort of legendary father, very sort of powerful father, the son condemned to live in his shadow. And the fact is, between Harilal and Mahatma Gandhi, there was not that much of an age difference. Gandhi was very young when Harilal was born. So they were antagonists in a way. And how this affected Gandhi and how it affected Harilal. And I use this technique, actually, the relationship with the father, to also look at Indira Gandhi and to look at Vajpayee. Indira Gandhi, and I would always thought that she and Nehru were very close, and they were, close father-daughter. There was a lot of resentment, a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness she had towards her father because of the way her father had treated her mother, who was a very ailing, beautiful woman who Nehru neglected. And till the end, she tells one of her interviewers that if you go to my bedroom, you'll see a big photograph of my mother. No, you don't see my father. So, you see these relationships shape the persona. Vajpayee's father wanted him to be an academic and a professor. He could never be. He failed at that. And in a way, as a kind of rebellion, took to the RSS, took to Hindu nationalism, as if thumbing his nose at his father. Now, I'm not saying he did that, but if you read the texts, all these interesting personal insights come out, which is why I think personal details are so important if they are not salacious. I mean, Harry's autobiography is deeply salacious and sort of, and quite cringeworthy in some bits.
The problem there, Sagarika, is, when you talk about the private, in India, and particularly in Kerala, we think that a biographical subject is an immaculate subject, It's somebody that you should not in any way cast any aspersions. The very fact that somebody has become a biographical subject means that he or she is beyond censor. He or she is beyond any kind of taint. Now the problem is, as both of them mentioned earlier, we are all flawed human beings, deeply flawed. We carry our fragilities, we carry our vulnerabilities. And to believe that it is a biographer's task to whitewash all that and create the same facade that this person maintained in his or her own lifetime is to defeat the very purpose of the genre itself. So that is where I think we need to draw a line between what is a critical biography and what is an authorized biography. We seem to be getting, and we have become so fascinated by the authorized biography so that we can build all these personality cults, which we seem to love. We love huge cutouts. We love our palabhishegams on these cutouts, right? That is something that is deeply part of our psyche also. We love to worship. We love to be followers. So this whole trend happens in the biographical project also. And I think this is a huge, huge pitfall that every biographer has to resist at each and every point in the act of biography writing.
Because the person is much more rewarding with the flaws. Actually, like all Greek tragedy, as a professor of literature, I mean, the great characters of Shakespeare or of the Greek plays were flawed. They were shot through with fatal weakness. And so in that sense, I think a biographer must also bring in the eye of a fiction writer, because the fiction writer is alive to character, and the fiction writer is alive to individual evolution. The fiction writer is also alive to relationships. So I think when we approach a subject, rather than, if it's a politician or whatever, rather than as Ulrich was saying, get drawn into the authorized text that the family wants us to see, or the party wants us to see, or the interested parties wants us to see, the biographer has to be courageous enough not only to be an investigative journalist, but also not to write in fiction, because we are not dealing with fiction, we're dealing with reality, but to have the eye of a novelist. The eye and the sensitivity of the novelist, because you're dealing at the end of the day with human material. The material is human. So when that human material evolves or regresses or falls into dilemmas or falls in love or falls in hate, there I think the sensibility of a novelist also helps.
Yeah, I think, Ulrich, if I can just narrate the incident. The reason why both Sagarika and I were very passionate about what we were saying is we had a bad experience. We were in Calicut and we were discussing her book on Vajpayee. And then in a couple of days, I was aghast to learn that I'm not on social media. I was aghast to learn that the entire social media was abuzz with the fact that they were casting aspersions on both of us, saying that we were sympathizers of Vajpayee. And what he stood for, the party he stood for. Now, this for us it shows us something. It's a very telling kind of a response, because it means that at the other end of the spectrum, the readers also believe that a biography is a hagiography. So that is the problem, and I think that is something that not only at the writing end, at the biographer's end, but also on the other end, at the end of reception studies or whatever you call it, you have to be critically sensitive to the fact that a biography is also a critique of the person's life. And that is the way, as Sagarika rightly pointed out, that is the way you pay tribute to the person, not by creating hagiographies. I think you do a great disservice to the person when you write a hagiography, because that ends there. It will not stand the test of time.
No, I think, biographers, or for that matter, any writer would expect validation on the social media, especially a place where it's so shrill. You can't expect any kind of strong comment, a solid critique of what you've talked about, because it's meant to be so crisp, and it's designed to generate outrage. So how can you expect a certain kind of a serious critique of your biography or what you've talked about or what you've written on social media? One day might come, but as of now, it is designed to create a lot of ill will between people, to become divisive. And again, coming to the technology part of it, the biggest challenge that biographers face, now I'll come to the point that Sagarika raised about using, I think she meant we must employ the technique of fiction or fictional elements.
No, not write fiction.
Not write fiction, but the elements used in fiction.
Of the fiction
yeah,
writer,
because it's not the first time journalism has done that. It's not the first time that the writing community of writing of any kind of subjects have done that. Even when you write physics, when the whole movement of new journalism happened, when Tom Wolfe announced from the rooftops that, sorry Bellow, it was addressed at Saul Bellow, the Nobel Prize winning American writer who had a great he was terribly upset the way the newspapers were writing news reports which carried a lot of elements of fiction. So he said, sorry Bellow, the Huns have arrived. So the point is, especially now that you're faced with assault from technology, whether it's an assault or whether it is to be seen as assistance, Chat GPT, we live in this age of Chat GPT where the Wikipedia kind of accounts of a person's life, can be easily framed, and maybe ChatGPT can write a whole biography in one go. And what is that we need to do as biographers or aspiring biographers to stay relevant this point of time is to definitely use the elements of fiction, and also not to follow the current style, not to follow the style of chronology, to use all kinds of elements of fiction, including flashback and everything, to keep it alive. In this context, I just want to tell you about Simon Bolivar's works on Simon Bolivar, the man who freed entire Latin America from Spanish conquest. We have had thousands of biographies on Simon Bolivar, but the book which actually captures Simon Bolivar to the fullest is Gabriel Garcia Marquez's General in His Labyrinth, which is a work of fiction. Same, if you look at Dominican dictator Trujillo, Feast of the Court by Llosa. Llosa is a classic example of how you can, these are novels, these are works of fiction, but I think we can extensively borrow these techniques to make to do justice to a biography while being committed to truth, completely, absolutely committed to truth.
Actually, particularly, just to say a little bit about women, the characters of women that there exist in India. We have, we're used to thinking about the founding fathers, but there are very, very solid founding mothers. There were 45 women in the Constituent Assembly. There were women in Nehru's cabinet. And I think to bring alive these women, these flesh and blood women, and who they were and how unconventional they were, is, unless biographers do this, we're missing out on so much. I'll give you an example of a biography that I read that really, autobiography that I read that really struck me. Jagdish Bhagwati, the eminent economist, his wife is Padma Desai. And she's written an autobiography. And Padma Desai is an economist herself, and she's, she's an expert on the Soviet Union. And, so I picked up this autobiography thinking it would be a very dry piece of academic writing about her career in academia. This book is, it is so interesting. She married outside her parents' consent. She contracted syphilis. Her parents thought she would never marry again because of the disease that she had and the stigma that everybody felt because she had got this sexually transmitted disease. How she came out of that disease, how she then went to America and became a academic luminary there. It is riveting. It is riveting. And so I think that in that sense, there are these kind of, and I was amazed that Padma Desai, writing in the 1970s about this, a woman who was, married, not married, had relations outside wedlock, contracted this disease. It was actually, as the British say, it was gobsmacking. And I think there are so many stories like this. For example, if you read Nehru's letters, of course, Nehru's relationship with Edwina Mountbatten is well known, and his relationship with, Padmaja Naidu is well known. But what is not known are his relationship with Bharati Sarabhai, the eldest daughter of the second eldest daughter of the Sarabhai clan. And again, you know, I came across these letters, I was thinking, who is this Bharati Sarabhai? Why don't we know about Bharati Sarabhai? And then I investigated more. She took a double first at Oxford. She was a historian. She wrote plays. She never married. She did marry, but you know it didn't work out, and she forged her own path. I mean, it's in a small way. She may not have moved mountains. She may not have become prime minister. She may not have reached the top job, but she lived an extraordinary life. And I think these people who live these unseen, unknown, extraordinary lives change things for us. You know, they change our environment, they change our society, they change the environment for women in subliminal ways. Maybe we don't know that our environment is being changed, but it is being changed because of these, you know, that wonderful line in George Eliot about Dorothea Brooke, where she says that things are not so bad with you and me is because of the many who live a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. So, I mean, they led a hidden lives, they rest in unvisited tombs, but they were remarkable women. And maybe they weren't noticed, but they changed things. So I think there's so much that a biographer can do to bring these people alive. And you know, even the men, I mean, Ram Manohar Lohia, for example, or Minu Masani, or you know, Hiren Mukherjee, or Bhupesh Gupta, the great parliamentarians of the 50s and 60s, who led these incredibly bohemian lives. Ram Manohar Lohia never married. He lived all his life with his companion. Hiren Mukherjee had a similarly unconventional life. I mean, there's so much rich human material that there is. And so today when you see the kind of judgmentalism, the puritanism, the sort of, you know, so-called thekedars of Bharatiya Sanskriti laying down this is right and this is wrong, what do they know about our freedom mothers and our freedom fathers, who were really radical, unconventional, real, complex people? And I think that, so that's why I think a biographer in India has so much material that he or she can work with, because there are all these wonderful human beings. I mean, they're not wonderful, but they are complicated human beings who provide us with rich human material and examples that we can learn from, you know. So I think there needs to be many more biographies. And I think biographies need to be rescued from the trap of, you know, official biographies and also, you know, a kind of tell-all biographies. I think we need a much better culture of biographies in India, you know. The biographical culture in India needs to improve. I mean, how many of you here have seen, for example, the OTT series Crown? Has anybody seen Crown? You've seen that. Now, I mean, I think that, you know, now that it draws on the British royal family and it lays out before us the details that we are riveted to and we're learning so much from. Now, why, you know, can't we learn similar things about our, you know, families and, you know, our leaders and all of that? So I think we need a far more, we need a much more vibrant, a much more inquisitive, a much more open biographical culture, which is investigative, which brings the eye of the fiction writer, which is not sympathetic but critical, as Meena was saying, and also at the same time, which draws out the human material that we can all learn from.
I think it's not just the genre itself. I think no biography is born in a vacuum. So what is it born into? What is it crafted out of? It is crafted out of human lives, and it goes on to reading practices, discussions, maybe literary aesthetics, so many things. So this not being born in a vacuum, I think takes on many of the things that we have in our public domain regarding private lives, our own lives which we guard so fiercely within the private, where we feel that the hypocrisy that we practice outside need not be part of the private. So I think it's the disjunct between the private and the public, the huge disjunct, and I don't see why there should be a disjunct. Why can we not lead the lives that we want to lead? And this hypocrisy, I think, goes on into the genre also, the very genre of writing, where we think that it is a biographer's project to maybe protect the biographical subject from the intense scrutiny that the public
But
might.
Meena, nobody's perfect.
No, they are
None
not.
of us are perfect.
They are not. That's
and
precisely
we can,
the point.
Exactly.
That's
and
precisely the point.
we can feel better
Yeah.
about our imperfections and
Yes.
our failings and our problems.
No, Sagarika, that's precisely the point I'm making. I'm
Yeah.
making the point that
Yeah.
it is born out of the hypocrisy of an
Exactly.
entire
Yeah.
culture,
Yeah.
which thinks that,
Yeah.
that life is,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
sanctified and so halo
Yeah.
that it
Yeah.
is beyond critique.
And don't you think that we can morally, spiritually, and psychologically grow
Yes, we need
if
to.
we accept that all these people who we today revere had flawed lives? Because everybody is flawed, had flawed, imperfect lives. We can grow spiritually and psychologically and accept flaws and how to deal with them if we see them laid bare in.
So I think it's for the audience
the
to,
audience.
the readers to reject those kinds of
Yes.
biographies and take up richly nuanced critical biographies. That's the whole point we are trying to make.
I think we need to have more rebels or a biographer as a rebel. It's not that we haven't had. In fact, throughout the world we have had, and India also we have had, Sarvepalli Gopal's biography of his father, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan. It's an outstanding work. Like no son would ever write anything so graphic. That is what we would think, but he did write it. So Sarvepalli Gopal had written a great biography of Nehru as well, but I think the one that stands out because of this whole concept of biographer as a rebel is his biography of his father. And similarly, we find a lot of them across the world happening, and a lot of people are ready to reappraise history and also reappraising history at the same time. As Sagarika was talking about having more women, putting spotlight on a lot of people who were not in the spotlight at one point of time when they should have been. These are, especially they happen to be women or they happen to be Dalits or people like that. And so now there is a great scope, therefore, like she said, for a lot of people, if whoever is interested in taking up writing, to focus on biographies, because biographies not only tell the story of life of a person, but it tells about the time. It's like literature, it's a type, it's a model that lives on, that endures. So I think it's time that more people seriously take to writing biographies without any fear.
So
A
I think we
biography should not be a statue. Today we have the war of the statues. Ambedkar versus Netaji versus Savarkar versus. So these are these statues and Mahatma Gandhi who dominate our lives. Biographies are not about statues. They're about real people, because today we don't know who Ambedkar is. We don't know who Netaji is. We don't know who really Savarkar is, because we're so busy fighting these partisan political wars on these people and either making them into statues or making them into punching bags. So a biography is not a statue. A biography is a laying bare of a human being from whom we can learn.
So let there be more rebellious biographers and more rebel readers, which I think is required. Shall we wind up there?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for a patient hearing.